Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring you curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner with the Duluth News Tribune, and I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we look at the origins of a famous Minnesota photograph and how its legacy is being preserved. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to share with us the past and present of the photograph known simply as Grace is reporter Teri Cadeau. Teri, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we get into it, let's maybe just describe the photo for maybe those who aren't familiar with, or at the very least aren't familiar with it by its name. I certainly wasn't. I'd recognized it when I looked at it in your article. So if you're looking for a visual reference, listeners, as always, check out the article in the Northlandia column at duluthnewstribune.com/topic/Northlandia. Anyways.
Well, it's called Grace because it features a person who it looks like he's possibly giving grace before eating a meal. Not a huge leap there. But it's a very old gentleman, and he's dressed in mostly black, and he's got a white beard and white hair, and he has his hands folded and his head bowed, and he's got a big loaf of bread and some... The way it's described on the Enstrom website is a bowl of gruel, which I'm like, okay, good God. All right, that sounds dramatic and very old-fashioned-y, but okay, sure, a bowl of gruel. And then a book on the table, which there's some dispute. Is it a Bible? Or was it a Swedish-American dictionary? We don't know. But it is a photograph, which I think a lot of people get surprised by because when they see it, they've maybe seen a colorized version of it or one that's been reproduced or painted in some way. And so
yeah, I was definitely in that camp. I had only ever seen it in the form of what looks like a painting. I didn't realize it was a photograph. Not that I've ever paid too much attention to it.
Well, it was a photograph that got painted over. I talk about in the story how the photographer's daughter created those later in the colorized versions. But originally it was a black and white photograph, and it's become a very well-known image. Most likely place you probably have seen it is in somebody's kitchen or maybe living room in somebody's house. And it's probably a print that they have that maybe they got from a grandparent or an aunt or somebody just gave it to them.
I couldn't tell you where I've seen it. I mean, it definitely was not in my family house growing up, or I don't know. I don't know where. I just know I've seen it. I've seen it somewhere. Maybe it was a friend's house, and I'm sure a lot of people feel that way as well.
Well, that was something that when I submitted the story, then I got a message from our executive editor Rick saying, "Hey, I remember seeing those all the time growing up in every Dutch household. They had one in Michigan, and so that's a very common sight. I just didn't know that it was taken here in Minnesota, and also again that it was a photograph because it's a big surprise for a lot of people. But for me personally, I do remember seeing it. It was in my grandmother's kitchen, so I would go to her apartment, her very tiny apartment up in Virginia, and visit her, and it'd be in her kitchen right next to a replica of the Last Supper. So, kind of a theme going there.
Got the kitchen vibe going there.
Italian grandmother's kitchen. Big surprise.
Now, before we get into the, as aforementioned, origin of the photograph itself and the photographer behind it, how did you come across the story? What prompted you to actually look into this?
Well, some of that is having grown up, seeing the photo, and but we've had it on I think we've mentioned on the podcast before that we kind of have a list of story ideas that we've had for a long time. And I'd known about this before the list. I'd known that this photo was taken in Bovey. I don't know where I first learned it from. I remember hearing it and going, "Wait, that's a local thing? I thought that was a really well, the Mona Lisa.
A European painting of some kind.
Yeah, I had
not a
no
photograph.
idea. There was a paint in that it came from here, and I'm like, okay. So I kind of locked that away, and then didn't think about it again for a very long time, and then eventually I was looking for a story idea, and I thought, it's worth telling this story. It has been told in the D&T before. We've had stories in the past talking about it, talking about different aspects of it, talking to different family members, but it's still new to people. People still don't know this. It's still not that common of a piece of knowledge. So I thought it was worth to do another dive and take a different look at it, talk to somebody else in the family, come up with this article.
And possibly its first time in audio form for those who take their news and history in podcast form.
There is that. Yeah.
Now let's get into the origins of.
Yeah.
So the photographer Eric Enstrom, what's his history, and when did he go about making? the
so
photo?
He was kind of an interesting guy. He immigrated from Sweden in the late 1800s. And he moved to the United States and did a couple of different jobs. He sold Watkins. you sometimes still buy like Watkins vanilla at Menards or something like that, but like it used to be more of a door-to-door sales sort of a thing, in a buggy cart horse sort of a deal. So he sold Watkins for a period of time, and he went to school to become an optometrist. He went to school for photography, and that's the one that really seems like it's stuck. It's the photography aspect of it. So he opened up a studio first in Minneapolis, and then eventually found himself up in Bovey, of all places, and he was doing photography there when he got a knock on a door one day. A different traveling salesman. It was a guy who, I believe the story is that he was selling foot scrapers is the detail. I don't know if I included it there, but he was selling something or other. And something about this gentleman, his name was Charles Wilden, struck Eric Enstrom, and he thought, he was working on a series, a portfolio to take to a photography convention in the cities. And so he thought, okay, I'm going to see if I can get this guy, if I can take his photograph. And so he did. He set up the background. He set everything up. So it wasn't like he just stumbled across this person and he was sitting like that and he took a photo. Very much a stage, set up stage kind of photo. But once he looked at the negatives of it, he was like, oh, this is something. Yeah, no, this is good. And it ended up being his most popular photograph probably of all time for him. Yeah, for sure.
And when was this about? Like, what was the kind of timeline for all this?
Oh, this was 1918. I think that's around the same year that a lot of different stuff was happening. I think you mentioned the Spanish flu, and yeah.
A lot of big global things going on at that time period.
It was a big time, and it got really popular, especially towards the 1950s, which I believe is when he finally sold the rights to it to a publishing company in the cities, and so they reproduced it at a greater rate than he could. Yeah.
So how, like, going back a little bit, how did it gain popularity? Like, how did it go from this, like, oh, this is a great photo, I got something here, go from that concept of he had this thought that this could be something, and it did become something.
It was very natural at the time. It was, I think, as close as you could be to maybe something going viral at a time that things didn't go viral like they do now online. He had it up in windows and shops, and people just kept buying it, and he had to keep printing more and more copies. And then his daughter, Rhoda, created the first colorized copy. So she used these transparent inks, and she used them to make a colorized version of it. And they started printing those as well. And then eventually she used a different, more of an oil kind of to go over the photograph, and it turned into that kind of drawn look that we were talking about seeing in the past. Yeah. So yeah, it just grew in popularity over time. It became, I believe I heard of it, it became a popular wedding gift to give to like couples.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was like new couples. They're just like, oh, here you go. Something for your kitchen. There you go.
To say that fits, that feels like for your new home.
Yes,
here you go.
exactly.
Put it above, and I expect to see it there when I come to visit.
Yeah, of course. That's interesting. I wonder if there's any of that where, people felt pressured to keep it because they got it as a gift. Interesting. I don't know.
I mean, it's been 100 years, so I'm sure there's been some that have genuinely wanted it because I've seen people kept buying it, or maybe there were some people that were like, oh, okay, I guess put up an obligation, But either way, it's been circulating for 100 years. And if I understand from reading your story, it became pretty popular in Minnesota, especially.
Yes, absolutely. And oddly enough, I'm reminded of a fact that I once wrote a story for the Duluth Budgeteer back in the day about a woman giving her copy of it to the Duluth Union Gospel Mission. And so that was an interesting afternoon to go there. I think that's probably where I first learned that it was taken in Bovey, because I was like, oh, what is this thing that she's giving to? Okay, why? Okay. Basically, she'd seen an empty spot on the wall and was like, you know what needs to go there? This photo that I have, that needs to go there. And so she donated it, and it was lovely.
And tell me more about, because obviously that's the past.
Yeah.
I'm assuming he's not still around anymore.
No, very much not. No.
Unfortunately, I imagine so after over 100 years since the photo was taken.
And also his daughter, the one who did all the paint, she has also passed in 2012, I believe.
Oh, okay.
And so I talked to his grandson, who grew up with him and was around for about 20 years of his life. He was born in 1948, and his grandfather passed in 1968. He's a lawyer out in Grand Rapids. And he took some time out of his very busy schedule to talk with me and share some stories about going hunting with his grandfather and how he liked to be a very avid outdoorsman and loved to do different activities. And yeah, so it was a kind of a nice snapshot of a person behind this very well-known photo.
So talking about how obviously this photo's now been around for over 100 years, what kind of helped solidify its legacy beyond just simply, oh, people were buying it, because, there's lots of things that were popular for a long time, but this thing has somehow stood the test of time for over 100 years.
Yeah, well, far after Eric Enstrom had passed away, in 2002, it was named the Minnesota State Photograph. So it was solidified. I think Jesse Ventura was the governor at the time, and he signed it into being the state photograph. So that kind of helps solidify its legacy to a degree. I believe also, I think I heard about some place in Bovey, they have little signs about it all over town, and that's the whole thing.
Well, I imagine they're
proud of it.
Proud of that.
For
I
sure.
feel like these smaller communities up in the Iron Range and just all over the Northland is like they hold on to their their claim to fame,
Yeah, that's definitely a thing.
And I imagine the photograph's still available for purchase through their website and such. I'm sure their grandson's keeping it around.
Yep. They have a website with all the information about how it came to be and about it becoming the state photograph, and where you can find, prints of it and have your own in your home, in your own kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
It continues on.
Yeah. And why do you think the story fits into Northlandia? Obviously, it has a place in the Minnesota history as it did eventually become the Minnesota State Photograph. So obviously it's solidified its place in Minnesota.
Yeah.
But what about Northlandia?
Well, I think the connection to Bovey is a huge part of that, because it's kind of that local connection and the surprise of learning the fact that it is something that was made locally. I mean, that's, again, I remember being so surprised by that, because I saw it on the same wall that the Last Supper by Da Vinci was on. So it's like, okay, wait a minute. These are the same. Okay.
They obviously must both be from the Renaissance period.
Yeah, obviously. That's exactly what, when you're a kid, you're like, obviously these are both of the same exact, value, and not that it's not, but it's just, it's very kind of interesting. And I think it's very telling that the gentleman who took it was an immigrant who had moved to Minnesota and ended up on the Iron Range and was doing what he could to get by. And that's a pretty common story for a lot of the people who end up in our realm of Northlandia.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, there's something also just kind of, not that it's Northlandia related specifically, but like reassuring about like, hey, like the idea of, you're pursuing one career and then you find another one is not like specific to, that crosses generations. You went to be an optometrist, ended up going the photography route. I originally went into exercise physiology in the hopes of becoming like a physical therapist. Realized I hated science, went into more video and the camera side of things, So it's kind of reaching, oh wow, okay, it's people from, a dude from 100 plus years ago also went through that kind of journey.
When he first came, he had to do farming because he was working off his price to come over, and so I mean that's you can end up doing a lot of different things for sure.
And now we know where that photo's from, because it's one of those things where you just never really.
So now next time you go to somebody's house and you see it hanging in the wall, you can go, oh hey, did you know? You're welcome. There you go.
Especially if you want to be extra snobby about it. If it's a painting in their house, you're like, did you know that's not actually a painting? That's a photograph. If you really want to be that person.
If you want to be that person, you now have go ahead, you do you.
If you've ever felt driven to have a moment of being an art snob without any knowledge of art, this is your opportunity.
Well, now you have some. You have some now. You have a little bit of knowledge. There you go.
Yep. Right here on Northlandia.
A little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Have fun with it.
All right, we'll wrap up there, Teri. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, as well as see archival photos, visit DuluthNewsTribune.com/topics/Northlandia. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber to Duluth News Tribune at DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss when you're on the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path in the rush to return, here in Northlandia.